Everyone has a different idea of what constitutes a frightening experience, and that's why the horror genre has a vast range of possibilities. When playing a horror game, one must confront a variety of things that can be considered terrifying. But a lot of what's usually thought of as scary is only found in works of fiction, such as monsters and ghosts. We know that the imagination of developers can create the most creepy atmospheres possible, but things get way more serious when we learn that a certain horror game is based on a real-life incident and story. That's not a coincidence, it's actually a psychological feature in our minds. Our brains literally starve for mysteries and bizarre situations that can't be explained. Even when something imaginary makes us scared, we still love to enjoy the idea that it might be real, because suspense triggers our curiosity and activates our interest immediately, so we can search even deeper to discover the truth. And that's exactly the purpose of today's video. I want to make things even more creepy with horror gaming and highlight 5 scary games that were actually based on real people and true occurrences. But before we start, I want to clarify that the link between some of the real-life stories and the fictional ones is not directly revealed by the creators of the games, but it's just too obvious in a way that anyone can easily catch the resemblance by doing a little bit of digging in the events that happened worldwide in the past.
Hey Doc, when will the elixir be ready?
It's almost ready, Mr. Meat. Just a little bit left. The elixir is ready. To complete the elixir, I needed one unpleasant ingredient: pig droppings. Here, it remains to find a volunteer who will drink it.
I finally got what I wanted.
Mr. Meat.
What?
May I ask where your wife is? I haven't seen her in months.
I decided to send her to her mother for the duration of our experiment.
This game has a clear mission. You need to save a girl called Amelia Clark, but to achieve that, you must be smarter than Mr. Meat, the heartless enemy in the Mr. Meat game. He is a fat, bald guy with stains of blood on his face, and his closest friend is his pig. He also has very good hearing that can make him hear any wrong move you make. He'll rush to you quickly whenever you cause a noise, regardless if it's loud or quiet. His auditory capacity is his major vulnerability though, as you can use sound to misguide him and make him confused. This game is one of the most popular mobile games out there, with more than 10 million downloads, and many people became addicted to it over the years, especially because it offers a challenging task and an entertaining gameplay. With that being said, I'm pretty sure most of you are not here to learn about the number of downloads of the game or how it works. You're probably wondering how it's related to a real-life event. Well, the true story that inspired this game is actually even more scary than the virtual mission itself. Because the real-life Mr. Meat is actually one of the most ruthless serial killers in America's history. He's not known for just killing or kidnapping his victims. What made him memorable is actually what he does after ending their lives. He caused a wave of horror in the state of Maryland for 2 decades, between 1976 and 1996. His name is Joseph Roy Metheny, or simply Joe Metheny. After Joseph Metheny was apprehended in December of 1996, he was only convicted of 2 murders, because the evidence that prosecutors had was only enough to charge him with killing 2 women. Even though Metheny himself confessed that he killed 13 people, and he was kinda surprised that the police couldn't charge him with those murders, despite the fact that he gave them details about where he threw the bodies. But since the remains were never found, they can't convict him without proof. Anyway, that's not the discussion of our video. Our main purpose is to talk about the relation between him and Mr. Meat. Earlier, I told you that Joe gained a bad reputation because of what he does to his victims after murdering them, and that's exactly the relation between him and the scary guy in the game. After committing his crimes, Metheny used to store the fresh organs of their bodies and some of their meat in his freezers. But the question is, why he did that. The answer is actually worse than what came to your mind right now, because I'm positive that most of you now are thinking that he's storing those things to eat them afterwards, which is kinda true, but to be precise, he took another step towards insanity. He was mixing the meat of his victims with pork to eventually make burgers and patties, but not for himself. He was literally selling them at a barbecue stand in front of his house. He said that humans' flesh tastes similar to pork, and that's why people didn't notice anything after buying his sandwiches. He stated that if you mix the meats together, it's hard to figure it out. He was even trying to be funny about it, and said that next time you see someone selling burgers in the streets, you should think about my story before putting the sandwich inside your mouth. I think that's enough to make you get the point, because I really don't want to talk about this human burger subject anymore. It's obvious for you now that Joseph Metheny is the source of inspiration that influenced the creators of Mr. Meat. Even physically they look similar. Both characters are fat, bald men, and this makes them identical, especially because Metheny used to weigh 400 pounds too. So his big belly definitely gets him even closer to Mr. Meat. Even though the developers didn't officially announce the events that influenced their ideas, but we all know that horror game creators like to keep things in the dark, so they can create more suspense among players. They usually make games based on real-life occurrences, and they cover it with huge twist, but they want your imagination to figure it out and attach the dots.
What's going on? Gabby? No!
Neverending Nightmares is a psychological horror game, where the protagonist is in a state of confusion when he was awakened from a dream. He must explore this nightmarish universe and evade the symbolic beings trying to attack him, all while figuring out what is real and what is simply a reflection of his inner struggles. The game was created by Matt Gilgenbach, and the motivation for developing it was derived from the lead designer's personal experience with mental issues. On the game's Kickstarter page, Matt openly talks about his struggles with obsessive-compulsive disorder and depression, which were the basis for his game's concept. Gilgenbach has claimed that the imagery, anxiety, and disturbing ideas he experienced during a serious mental health crisis in the early 2000s, are deeply embedded in his alarming game. The infinite passageways, the eerie ticks and tocks of grandfather clocks, and an axe smeared with blood, all the aspects, insignificant or major, have been derived from his past mental health issue. Knowing this context really makes the experience way more interesting for you as a player, but disturbing at the same time, because you will be virtually reliving a sad, dark side from a real person's life, who almost lost his sanity at some point. And this is probably the most realistic story you can ever play, because it simply was designed by the person who lived it in real life himself.
Dear Thomas, I'm leaving you. I'm sorry. You can't talk me out of it. I still love you, but I just can't be with you anymore. Losing our daughter was hard on me too, yet I'm trying to move on. Your life didn't end, so why can't you live it? I hope you can get past this tragedy eventually, I really do. I guess this is goodbye.
I don't think there's a need for me to explain how the game Granny works or tell you its story, because I'm positive that 99% of you are already familiar with it and watched dozens of YouTubers play it. But the reason you are watching right now is definitely your curiosity. You want to know who's the real old woman that inspired the Granny persona, and what are the things that she did that made her a source of influence to create such evil character. Well, for this one, we actually have two suspects, and both of them are from Mother Russia. The first suspect is the popular one, and she's called Tamara Mitrofanovna Samsonova, a 75-year-old woman who was arrested back in 2015 after being accused of killing 13 people between the years 2000 and 2015. Her victims included women and men, and even her 79-year-old neighbor Nikolaevna Ulanova, who helped her and gave her shelter in her own house. She used to dismember the bodies of her victims and then simply throw bags full of their remains on the streets. She even got caught on camera while leaving the house of her friend after killing her and putting her body parts in bags, so she can get rid of them on her way. To summarize it for you, she was a cold-blooded killer that can literally murder someone without getting stressed or nervous. One of the elements that made people disregard suspecting her is basically her innocent look and gentle way of communicating. If you see her in the streets, you'll think that it's a nice granny who's probably going to meet her grandchildren and play with them. But at that same moment, she's probably carrying some human parts of her victims to erase any evidence that can lead to her. In other words, she can easily be the perfect real-life version of the Granny game. With that being said, I'm personally leaning more towards suspect number 2, and I really see her as an identical real-life replica of the Granny in the game. The woman I'm talking about is the infamous killer Sofia Zhukova. Sophia was a serial killer who committed multiple murders for 14 years, from 2005 to 2019, which means that she killed someone even when she was 80 years old, making her the oldest serial killer in the history of Russia. Just like our previous suspect, Sophia also used to cut the bodies of her victims to pieces and throw their parts in different places. But that's not all. She actually did something that takes her even higher on the level of craziness and ruthlessness. Many sources stated that she used to eat parts of her victims' meat and even make snacks with pieces of their flesh. So I'm pretty sure you can understand why she's my primary suspect and how insane she was. The nature of her victims also make her even more scary and closer to the fictional Granny, especially when you realize that her first victim was an innocent girl at the age of 8 years old, called Anastasia Alexenko, and she was killed by Sophia with an axe before being dismembered. The girl was the daughter of Sophia's neighbors, and after her arrest, Sophia simply justified the crime by saying that the child was making too much loud noises. So literally no need for more evidence to prove that this woman is the incarnation of the virtual wicked granny that scared us for years. But I have a feeling that some Sherlock Holmes will come at me in the comments and say that this killer was apprehended in 2019 after 2 years of the game's release, so she can't be the source of inspiration. Well, that's true, but doesn't necessarily debunk the relation between the two. Because Sophia's name actually started to circle as a granny killer back in 2013, after she killed her friend Anastasia Mikhieva with an axe while she was in her apartment during a visit. The victim was 77 at that time. The cops suspected Sophia, and when they went to search her home, they found traces of blood in the floor, but she succeeded in convincing them that those traces are just the result of a nose bleeding that the guest had when she was visiting her. Even though she was the main suspect, but obviously the police disregarded her involvement because of her old age, and that's why they didn't charge her, which gave her another chance to continue pursuing more victims until she got caught in 2019 after killing a janitor called Vasily, who was 57.
Сколько раз нанесли ударов?
Раз, по-моему, 3.
От ваших ударов что произошло с ним?
Слева. Он упал и еще крякал что-то.
But Sophia didn't actually have the chance to go through a trial in 2021, as COVID took her life in December 2020 at the age of 81, ending the story of one of the scariest murderers in the history of the country. Personally, I'm convinced that Sophia is the perfect source of inspiration that led to creating Granny. When you focus on the details, you'll notice that all Sophia's victims were killed by the same weapon, which is the axe, and it kinda seems similar to Granny's weapons in the game. She also killed a young girl, just because she was playing and making noise outside her window, which also seems similar to the game when the Granny comes at you as soon as she hears any noise you make. And let's not forget that Sophia looks very scary too, and she does have the physical appearance of an evil old woman, unlike Tamara.
Я себя считаю невиновны, дети. Вы мои сладенькие птенчики. Невиновны. Я себя считаю невиновны. Я ничего не делала.
But I'm really curious to know your personal opinion and thoughts about this. Do you agree with my theory, or do you think Tamara is the actual real-life Granny? Either way, we are just speculating and none of us can prove anything, because the official developers didn't reveal any details about the ideas that motivated them to create the game. But that's not really important, because the point here is to find a real-life example that can match the game. And that's really enough to make it scarier. And to be honest, the two grannies that I mentioned in this video are literally even more petrifying than the fictional one, which proves that reality sometimes can be the actual nightmare. Five Nights at Freddy's is an indie horror game that was released back in 2014. At first sight, it seems like a casual game with a fun plot that was based on the imagination of the developers. But that's definitely not the case, because the ideas that motivated the creators to make the game are not actually very fictional, as the story behind it was basically inspired by a real-life event that happened 30 years ago. Even though the game is stuffed with startling moments, the franchise has still managed to attract a wide range of younger fans. So it is really ironic to think about the bloody roots of this game, from which it draws its influence.
You may have heard about the old locations, you know. Some people still have a somewhat negative impression of the company. That old restaurant was kind of left to rot for quite a while, but I want to reassure you.
You take on the role of a security guard in the game, responsible for guaranteeing that nothing goes wrong every evening. But when the distinguished robotic characters of the location come to life, your main concern should be your own safety. It is clear that the game was not based on actual animatronics becoming conscious and murdering people, but it demonstrates that dark scenarios based in truth can motivate fear that can only exist in imaginative stories.
Without it, kinks. You're only the second guard to work at that location. The first guy finished his week, but complained about conditions. We switched him over to day shift.
What many people don't know is that the setting of Five Nights at Freddy's is eerily similar to Chuck E. Cheese, and this is no accident. The concept of the murderous animatronics was actually inspired by a real mass murder that occurred in Aurora, Colorado in 1993. After the restaurant had closed for the evening, 4 Chuck E. Cheese staff members were tragically killed, and one more was severely injured when a former employee opened fire on them while they were in the process of cleaning up.
The robots were never given a proper night mode, so when it gets quiet, they think they're in the wrong room. So then they go try to find where the people are, and in this case, that's your office. So our temporary solution...
On the 14th of December, 1993, a shocking tragedy occurred at a Chuck E. Cheese's restaurant in Aurora, Colorado, when a former employee at the age of 19 called Nathan Dunlap decided to open fire at random workers and customers in the place. He had been terminated from his job 5 months prior to the shooting and was seeking revenge. After carrying out the act, Dunlap absconded from the place with stolen money and other items he took from the restaurant. He eventually was arrested and convicted of 4 counts of premeditated murder and attempted killing and various other offenses. He was condemned to death by lethal injection on the 17th of May 1996. A judge initially set an execution date for him in August 2013. However, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper issued a provisional stay to postpone Dunlap's execution date. And after a long cycle of trials, his penalty was reduced to life sentence, which caused a lot of controversy among the victims' families.
Music box wound up, piece of cake. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Hello?
To all of you who don't know the restaurant or the game's story, let me give you some context. The game is about a guy called William, who opened a restaurant with his friend Henry, where you can find robots that look like dolls that entertain children there. After hearing this, you're probably thinking that this looks like a happy story and wondering where's the strange thing about it. Well, I forgot to tell you that William is actually an insane serial killer, and he wouldn't let the events go normally that easy. Eventually, he decided to wear a mascot that looks exactly like the robots in the restaurant, and he lured 5 kids and ended their lives. Afterwards, he hid their bodies inside the robots to make sure no one can find them. But obviously things didn't end there, because the spirits of those children will end up taking over those robots and making them more alive than ever. But that's not all. The robots are now seeking revenge, and they're attacking any adult they see, because they assume it's William. Their souls are full of anger, and they won't stop until they find him. That's a brief of the game's plot. Now let's move to the real location. Chuck E. Cheese was a popular entertainment center and a pizza restaurant chain, established by Nolan Bushnell, the co-founder of the gaming company Atari. The center was built to serve families along with their children, and that's why they decided to make staying at their place more entertaining than ever. They added animatronic robot bands and put video games all over the restaurants, so kids can play and have fun with the robots while they're waiting for their meal. I think a vast majority of American people who were born in the 80s and 90s know exactly how Chuck E. Cheese was probably the best restaurant for children at that time. But its popularity didn't stop at United States. The chain also had branches in different regions and countries in North and South America and the Middle East. They had a big number of locations in Mexico and Saudi Arabia. And they even reached small countries like Qatar and Panama. In other words, the company was a massive success and the potential was getting bigger and bigger. But sadly, the place's name will be linked to a sad tragedy after 1993, when former employee Nathan decided to let the anger control his mind and make him shoot 4 innocent people who didn't even have a role in his job termination in the first place. If we focus a little bit, we'll find out how even the motives of the actual incident are similar to the game. In both scenarios, there's revenge and innocent people dying for mistakes they didn't commit. Nathan was angry because he was fired in a time when he needed money more than ever. But instead of trying to find another job, he saw that revenge is a better choice, especially that he also committed robbery and planned to steal any valuable thing in the restaurant. Although the events in the game are definitely way more exaggerated compared to reality, but that doesn't change the fact that the real-life story is equally scary and sad because it included people losing their lives. Many creepy stories came from the same restaurant's location in the next years, including people claiming that the robots in the place are acting weird, and children saying that sometimes robots are trying to harm them and touch them strangely. Even though I don't take those stories very seriously, but it's still disturbing. Hopefully the video wasn't too long for you. I really wanted to share with you the source of inspiration that influenced these 4 amazing horror games that we enjoyed over the last few years. Even though the real stories are definitely everything but joy. If you think the video was entertaining, please make sure to give it a like, so I can understand how many of you love this content, because that will definitely motivate me to make a similar video about the stories of other horror games soon. Until then, stay safe and take it easy.